When I met Swami in 1970, June 1970, I arrived in Whitefield, and it was a culmination of a pilgrimage that I set out on from that time in Almora the year before. And I went all around India, and I was visiting different teachers and different ashrams and finding disappointments. But all the time I was traveling, I was hearing about Sai Baba, and mainly about his miracles. And I really wanted some teacher that could give me spiritual knowledge and wisdom, so I wasn't really attracted to these miracles. But when I met Swami, that changed everything. And those of you that have read my book, Good Chances, know most of the stories that cover that period when I first arrived through that first year up until Christmas of 1971. But first, several people have asked me, if I've ever been married. And so I thought I'd tell you that 5 times in my life, Swami has told me not to get married. And that was in 1971 and 1977, 1978, 79, and 86. So part of the story I'm going to tell is that I almost did get married once. But in 1971, he called me in, and this was in Madras, or Christmas time, the day that Walter Cohen died, and he told me not to get married and to lead a free, unattached life. And in 1977, I was back there for a 1-month visit, and we had a number of interviews. Plus, there was a wedding he performed of Richard and Michelle Kaplowitz and Marcia and Wesley Huffman. It was a double wedding. And then after the wedding was over, when we were leaving, he called us to the bungalow in Whitefield. And I asked him, Swami, what about my marriage, all my friends, and he said, no, don't do marriage. He said, you're not young, you're middle-aged. Now, the 2 couples that he had just married were older than me. And Swami has his ways of really teasing you. Now, there was a circle of, sort of a semicircle of ladies standing. Say, Swami was in the middle, and the semicircle of ladies was standing there, and I was standing there. So I wanted to ask him, well, if I can't get married, what should I do about the natural urges and desires that one has? So he was talking to all these ladies and calling them in one by one separately to the room. And you could see him inside the room talking to these women, whispering and very quietly, very privately. So when it came my turn and I wanted to ask Swami this very important question, he comes out. Well, I should backtrack. In that winter, I was seeing this lady that I met at the Sai Center in Manhattan. And that was the winter of '77. And I was confused because Swami had previously, in 1971, told me not to get married. But I figured, well, this is 1977, so it's a long time. And so we were seeing each other, and it wasn't really working that well. And I would be in my bedroom up in Pound Ridge, New York, about 50 miles north of New York City in the woods, and praying to Swami, should I get married, should I not get married, what should I do? And also I had a lot of allergies back east, and it's one of the reasons I moved out west. And I was wheezing early in the morning. And in the interview, Swami said to me, he said, you sat in your little room there in New York, and you used to pray to Swami every morning, should I get married, should I not get married? And you'd be coughing like this. So he knows everything. I mean, he was able to say what I prayed for 10,000 miles away 6 months before in a little cottage in the woods. So he's standing there, and I think, well, now it's my turn, and he's going to take me in the room. So he comes out of the room with a bag of vibhuti, shaking his finger at me, and he says, where is your wife? Where is your wife? And I said, Swami, I don't have a wife. And he said, well, what about that girl? Tell. And I said, well, that relationship only lasted about 2 months. And he said, yes, yes, I know. He said, this is not good. I don't like it. And then I said, then he went and he handed out vibhuti to everybody. And I'm dying to ask him this question. Well, I mean, I want to know, did he expect me to be celibate or brahmachari, or what I should do about lust and things like that? I'm really dying to ask him this question. So he comes back and I said, Swami, and he goes, what? And the ladies, you know, all these ladies are standing right there, and I said, Swami, and he moves closer to the ladies, and he says, what? Like that. So I'm trying to get up the courage to say, Swami, what about lust, you know? And he says, that time, think of Swamiji, is what he said. And then he turned and he walked inside. As he was going inside, he stopped. He threw his hand up in the air like this, and he said, lust, lust, lust. And he laughed hysterically and went inside. So there I was, totally embarrassed and humiliated. And so went back to the States. And then he had said to me in that interview to come next year for summer course. So after the summer course, we went up to Puda Party, and I was really getting anxious, because here I had made this major decision to quit my job and move to California, and I really wanted Swami's blessings and some guidance. And one day he finally walked by in the darshan line, and I got up on my knees and I said, Swami, I want to talk to you about my career. You know, I was still at the stage where I wanted something from Baba. And he said, yes, yes, I will see you. And then that afternoon, I was in the canteen having lunch, and I noticed this man, young man from America, I guessed he was from America, and he had really bulgy white eyes. I mean, I guess he had a thyroid condition or something. And he had a beautiful gold ring that looked like Swami had made him, and I was really curious about this gold ring because it really attracted. So I went up to him and I said, can I see your ring? Did Swami make that for you? And he said, yes. And it was very beautiful, and his name was Jesse, and he was from California and all that. So in the evening, I was sitting in the prayer hall for bhajan towards the back of the door where the men come in, and Swami came out, and he walked down the veranda, and he called me out of the prayer hall, and he said, where is that man with the big white eyes? And I said, Swami, well, I guess he's here on the darshan. He said, no, he didn't come to darshan today. I was looking for him. And I said, well, I think he's staying in West Prashanti somewhere. Should I go and look for him? He said, no, no. He said, bring him tomorrow. And then he walked a few steps, and he turned around, and he said, is he from New York or California? And I said, Swami, he's from California. He said, yes, yes, bring him tomorrow morning. And then he walked in, and I sat down. I went back, and I sat down. He walked into his entrance to the prayer hall. He came down the aisle, and he came up to me, and he said, I made him that big gold ring. So a little, Swami knows everything. You know, he knows who you talk to in the canteen and who you're looking at and what you're doing. It's amazing. So that night, very late that night, I was up in my room in West Prashanti. There weren't any round buildings yet. And I get a message from the accommodations office that Swami's calling a group for interview at 8:30 in the morning, and I should go and find all these people. And I was given a list of names, but my name wasn't on the group. And neither was Jesse's name, but Swami had said, bring him tomorrow morning. And so I went and I found all these people. It was about 9:30 at night, and told them that Swami's calling them. And then I thought in the morning, well, I'll just bring Jesse, and we'll just go up to the veranda with the rest of these people and take our chances. And then Swami called everybody in, including us, one by one, and teased Jesse about different things. And then finally, when it was my turn, and he said, you rowdy, come on. And we went behind the curtain, and he was talking about, you know, family things, and he said that in my family there was a, you know, my parents had never quite seen the light with Baba, and it's always been a conflict, you know, of interest there. And he said to me, he says, in your house there's too much fighting. And I thought, my house, you know. In India, when they say that, they mean your family. And Swami said, he said, see, your parents have no devotion to God. And he said, you're following this path of devotion. He said, they think you're a madman coming here. And then he held my hands and said, but this is good madness. And it was a very sweet thing for him to say. But I wanted to ask him this question about my career. And I said, Swami, I want to move to California. And he said, why move? He said, native place is best. And I said, but Swami, I'm not happy with my work, and I want a job that uses my brains and my talent. Now, this is 1978, just to backtrack. And he said, what do you really want to do? Well, naturally, spontaneously, it came out of my heart. I said, Swami, I want to stay here and work for you. Because, truthfully, that was what I really wanted to do. And moving to California was the second choice, because I didn't think that it would be possible to stay in India and work for Swami. But he said, oh, yes, he said, I'm building a planetarium. And he said, you go and get planetarium training. And I was just totally stunned, you know, because I mean, when I was like in grade school, they took us to the Hayden Planetarium in New York, and I mean, that was about as much as I'd ever thought about planetariums or planetarium training or anything. And he said, you go and get planetarium training. And he said, you come back next year, he said, and I'm building a big planetarium. And he went into this description of this enormous planetarium that he was going to build. And I was just reeling, and I was saying, planetarium training, Swami? He said, yes, yes, planetarium training. He said, work 6 more months in New York, next get the training, and come back here. He said, I will arrange everything. And then as I was leaving, he said, and there's a planetarium in California, he said. So I came out of this interview totally shocked. I mean, totally turned around, because here I was working working for Harry Patterson in New York. He had one of these interior design showrooms and that sells furniture, carpets, and things to architects and designers. And I wanted to pursue this line of career and go out to California. And so I was totally turned around. And as I was leaving for India, at the end of this course, and it was about June of '79, thinking that I'd completed the 6-month training, and now Swami said come back and he would arrange everything. And I was growing very fond of Vicky, and she was growing fond of me, but I didn't think that it would be anything possible to, you know, start up any kind of relationship or anything, because I was going to India and I was going to stay in India the rest of my life. So we said goodbye. And I was off to India, and I got to India, and Swami just completely ignored me. Not only did he completely ignore me, nobody knew anything about this planetarium. Apparently the project had been shelved completely. So, and I found myself, here it was 1979, I found myself sitting on the Darshan line with no home and no job, and not knowing which direction I should go, and totally, you know, feeling deserted and kicked in the pants by Swami. And so I wrote him this letter, and I said, Swami, in this letter I said, all my friends, you know, all the contemporaries that I had gone to India with and been in India with in 1970, 71, 72, I said, they're all married, and they have children, and they have homes and careers, and I'm sitting here. And I gave him this letter among the many thousands of letters that he gets on a daily or weekly basis, and it just went into the, you know, sort of just went into the pile, and that was the last of it. And another few weeks went by, and so by the time I got settled down and started to get calm and started to surrender and started to feel that this is Swami's will and there's some good in this for me, and feel some peace within me, it was about 11 weeks had gone by, and about 3 or 4 weeks since I had given him this letter. And I'm sitting there finally one day in calm serenity on the Darshan line, and Swami walks up to me out of the blue, and he says, there's no planetarium. He said, go back, do any work there. And he walked away. Well, I was just totally stunned, you know. I was just thinking, oh my God, you know, like, I was just so shocked that tears were streaming down my face, and I thought Swami was the cruelest person that I'd ever met, you know, at that point. So then I was just sitting there. I came for bhajans that afternoon, and I was sitting in the middle of the prayer hall, and I was just crying, and he was sitting in his chair, and he was, you know, looking at me with a lot of compassion. And in the evening, he walked out, and it was an interesting darshan, because all he did was walk around close to that lotus circle. And when he came past where I was sitting, he pointed at me and said, I'll see you tomorrow. And he went inside. And that was the entire darshan that evening. And so the next morning I was sitting there and he said, Americans come. And he called me and some other Americans. And I went in the interview room for the first time ever, not really thrilled to be there. I was not happy. I was very sad. I was disappointed, dejected, and my ego was just struggling with all this. And he sat there and he said, see, he said, there's no planetarium. What can I do? He said, they ordered that small planetarium that, you know, from Chicago, from that man. What was his name? And I said, Swami, I don't know. And he thought, he said, Rush. He said, this. He says, Goldstein told me I was going to get a big planetarium. And he said, small boys look through little windows. What use is that? You know, and they had this little observatory thing that was made of plastic, and it had these windows, and you could look in and see the solar system, and they had set that up in the library at Whitefield so that the students could get encouraged, you know. And he said, small boys look through little windows. What use is? He says, oh, plastic. Everything from America is plastic. And he said, I spent 15 lakhs of rupees on this plastic. He said, what can I do? There's no funds, you know. So he's making an excuse. You know, here's God making an excuse to me and blaming it on Dr. Goldstein. It's funny now, you know, it is funny, and I laugh a lot about it. But in those days, at the moment, I wasn't too happy about it all. So he said to me, what is your work there? And I said, Swami, I worked for Mr. Patterson in New York. And he said, did you go to school? And I said, yes, I studied architecture. I said, but that was like 11 years ago. So he thought for a minute, and he said, then do engineering and construction. He said, work 5 years. Next, come back. I'll have some work for you here. That was in the group. Then he called me in privately, and he said, anger, ego, jealousy. He says, no faith in Swamiji. He just went on lambasting me like this, you know. And then, and he says, and you think of your friends. Now remember, I wrote him a letter nearly a month before. The letter went into the pile of thousands of letters. So if you think Swami doesn't know what's in your letters, he said, you think of your friends, and they're married, and they have children, and, you know, he's going on, just chiding me. And he said, ants get married and have children. He said, even worms. He said, even worms have children. What's the specialty? He said, lead free, unattached life. He said, don't do marriage. He said, but then he said, do you want marriage? And after he had said all that, it was hard to, it was very difficult to say, yeah, I want marriage. So I said, well, I guess not, Swami. And he said, good boy, I will bless. And he blessed me, and so there I was off, back to America, and thinking engineering and construction. And so back to December of '84, sitting in my house in San Francisco, this job that I had gone through was over. Everything was sold. I was sitting on boxes. All that incident with Vicky and the vision all had taken place 4 years before. And I'm just going to go back to Baba peacefully, and the phone rings, and it's Michelle Kaplowitz. And she said, are you sitting down? And I said, well, I have no furniture, but I'm sitting down. And she said, Swami's building the planetarium. And they're looking for somebody to be a consultant, and your name came up. And then I went to India because my 5 years were up and it was time to go. So I'm sitting on the darshan line, and I was with a group from Elsie Cowan's center. And one day Swami called Elsie Cowan's group. She wasn't there, but she had sent us all with a letter. And he called Elsie Cowan's group. And when I came up to the veranda with the rest of the people, he came up to me and he said, no, you go back. I'll see you, talk to you later. So that's always disappointing, but I figured he has his reasons. And so I'm sitting there in the darshan line, and then he came up to me one day and he said, planetarium training? I said, yes, Swami. He said, yes, yes, I will see, I will see. And nothing happened. And I was getting really frustrated, and weeks were going by. And here I was. I thought I was going to go to India peaceful and not want anything, but he stirred it all up again. Another time, which was really fun, he came down to the planetarium, and nobody was there but me. For some reason, nobody expected him. And Swami got out of his car, and he walked into the men's bathroom, which was under construction. They had put the pink tile in the men's bathroom and the blue tile in the ladies' bathroom. And Swami wasn't pleased about that. And so there I was standing there in this men's room with Swami, you know, and pink tile, and he was looking at every detail. He was saying, he said, look at this. This pipe is not straight. These tiles are the wrong color. Sinks are too small. And he said, many people will come here. Many foreigners will come here. He said, see how it looks. And then everybody else came running in. But he saw every detail of the construction. And he's like a real trained engineer foreman when he's out on the job site. I mean, it's just amazing that he doesn't miss anything. He knows how everything is supposed to be. He knows what's supposed to be where and how it all fits together. And he's talking to the engineers and telling them this and telling them that. Not asking questions, but directing. Well, they had originally ordered like a different color, but the wrong color tiles came in. And because of the time factor, they installed blue. So there were blue tiles and orange chairs with these sort of olive green armrests and legs. And Swami walked into the main theater one day, and he looked and he looked and he said, blue. He said, blue is for Mohammedans. He says, yes, yes, blue is for Mohammedans, you know, like, because if you go into all the mosques and everything in the Middle East, it's all blue. Blue is the main color. And then he said, he looked at me and he said, it's not good combination. And he said, tell Rowdy. He looked at me, tell. And I said, yes, Swami. I said, orange seats and green arms and legs and blue tiles, not good combination. He says, yes, it's not good. And then he went over to one of the entryways, which was cast in concrete, and it was a little bit crooked. And he said, this is not straight. And he said to Dr. Prasad, the director of the planetarium, why didn't you tell them? And he said to me, you're also blind. Why didn't you say anything? Well, I backtrack. I was told not to say anything about the construction or anything. You know, one of the organization people gave me advice, just stay, you know, you're just here as a consultant for shows and things. You don't have to make any comments about the construction. So I dare not say anything. And then Swami says to me, why didn't you say anything? So that's always how it is, you know. Well, what happened towards the end, we finally got this planetarium show going, and Swami came, it was about May 31st, he came back from Whitefield, and I had received a notice from the government of India that they would not extend my visa, even though I had a letter inviting me to stay from the university saying that they would like to have me there as a consultant for at least a year, and I had all these letters and documentation and guarantees and everything you're supposed to need to get a visa. They said they would not extend my visa because I entered on the wrong kind of visa. And so I realized I had to go back to the States. And I was sad about it, but in a way I felt, at this point in time, I felt, well, whatever happens is Swami's will and it's for the best. So I wasn't going through a big turmoil about it in that way, but I was sad that I was going to be leaving Swami. And Swami came down to the planetarium, and he got out of his car. It was a red Mercedes, and it was like the Lord getting out of his chariot. You know, there was something really beautiful about it. And he came up to me and he said, what about you, sir? He said, no permission. You have to go back to your country. And I said, Swami, will you see me before I go? And he said, yes, yes. And so a few days later, he called me in with a group of people, and they were all people who worked in the university and some Iranians, and called me in for, and he said, see, he says, too much problem with India and America is not good friendship, and he said, too much visa problem. He said, you go back to your country. He said, come and stay 6 months here, 6 months there. And I was thinking, and I had mentioned this yesterday, I was sitting there thinking, you know, well, how am I going to come and go for 6 months? And while he was seeing the other people, he was talking to them about their problems. Then he came and he called me and he said, you were sitting there thinking, how I'll arrange to come and go, don't worry. And then in one of the private, he called me in 3 times and gave me 3 private interviews. In one of the private interviews, he sat down and he looked in my eyes and he looked at me and he said, 6 years back, now this is 1986, and the incident where he appeared in my room over when Vicky decided, broke up with me and all that, was 1980, August, and this was around June 86. And he said, 6 years back, he said, there was that girl you wanted to marry. And he looked in my eyes. It was like a confirmation of that whole experience. And he said, now, he said, sometimes you think of ladies and marriage. He said, now, no ladies, no marriage, no more worldly thoughts and desires. You only think of Swamiji. And that was really the last things he said and that was in the 3rd interview. In the 2nd interview, he brought in a man from Peru who spoke English with a very, very heavy Spanish accent. So I acted as the interpreter between Spanish accented English to Telugu accented English. And Swami called this man in with me and he said, where are you from? And the man said, Peru. And Swami said, what did he say? And I said, Swami, he's from Peru. Oh. And Swami said, how long is he staying? So I said, Swami wants to know. He couldn't understand Swami, and Swami couldn't understand him. It was just a game, Swami speaks the language of the heart. And I said, how long? Swami wants to know how long you're staying. And he said, yes, I'm staying. And Baba would say, what did he say? It's like leaning over to me. It was just it was really a sweet comedy, And so I acted as an interpreter, and then he sent the man out. So, but after that 3rd interview, when he told me that, and he really said that, he said, you belong to me and I belong to you. And he said, no more worldly thoughts and desires. You only think of Swamiji. And then he went out, and instead of ending the interview like he normally does, he sat in his chair and talked for about 40 minutes. And the most moving thing that he said is he gestured out the window and he said, you see, he said, many people sit near me here in Puttaparthi. He said, but are they dear to me? He said, the frog sits on the lotus and croaks all day long, but it never drinks the sweet nectar of the lotus flower. And he said, but the bee flies in from far away, and it comes and it drinks the sweet nectar from the lotus flower, and it flies off. And he said, only dear is important, not near. And he looked at all of us and he said, be like the bee, not like the frog. He said, it's only heart to heart that matters. And he looked out the window and he gestured. He said, but all are my children. He said, for me, all are dear. And then he dismissed us, let us touch his feet, gave us the vibhuti, and we went out. And that was that 4 years ago.